Reload. Okay, welcome back to Thrive in the Future. This week, I have Buck Johnson with me from the Counterflow podcast. Welcome, Buck.
Thanks, Scott. Glad to be here.
How you doing this evening?
I'm pretty good. I can't complain. It's chill, cool Friday evening in Lockhart, Texas. It's nice.
So Lockhart, that by Austin or San Antonio or?
It's well, I say between. I suppose technically it's between. It's about 30 minutes southeast of Austin and about an hour still from San Antonio, but it's nice. It's the barbecue capital of Texas.
Oh yeah, I've seen you talk about that. That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, so the topic this week, and I thought this was interesting. So many people that we know have become Orthodox. You call it the libertarian to Orthodox pipeline. I mean, even the guy that I started the podcast with, Perpend, ended up becoming Orthodox, and now he's a monk or on
That's
the monk
incredible.
path. He's
Wow.
over at the monastery of the Archangel Michael in New Mexico.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah. I'm familiar with that one.
yeah, and he's become a postulant, which is like the 4 to 6 months before you become a novice. The way I understand it, it's like it's the last ditch effort before you become a novice.
But just to give you the opportunity to go, all right, I can't do this kind of thing.
Well, I think he's at the stage where it's finding the specific monastery that's the good fit.
Okay, sure.
So he's been around to a bunch of them, and a lot of them said, we're not going to take you really seriously until you've been Orthodox for over a year.
Okay.
And then, he went to Alaska and the climate didn't agree with him. And he's been to West Virginia and he's been to New Mexico several times.
Okay.
But, so he likes the New Mexico monastery. And basically you go for 2 weeks. And then after that, you're at the behest or whatever of the abbot.
And
so
they
at
just
some
send
point,
you anywhere.
yeah, and then or they can send you home.
Yeah. Okay.
And so at some point they made him a postulant, and my understanding from Google is that's the next step before you become like real. So
Wow. Okay.
I guess they have him doing like mucky muck jobs and
Yeah.
stuff to see see how willing he is.
Yes.
So so what about you? So what's your story? We've both become Orthodox in the last year. What's your story?
Well, I'm not going to be a monk so far. So far. It started. So I was libertarian of, I would say, the right wing sort. The Mises Institute libertarian sphere was the people that I was most comfortable around and knew and still know and still like the Mises people. And then I was an atheist too during all of this. And at some point I would say maybe around 2018, 2019, lower the walls I had around my soul, so to speak. But at the time I thought my mind, where I would at least acknowledge that Christianity seemed to produce fruits that were good, even though I thought it's not for me. Very materialist in my mindset. I think everyone from the West is that by default, unfortunately, just because that's the world we grow up in. And libertarianism, as you know, has a lot of rationalistic thought, concrete. You have to touch something if I can see it, if it's logical, et cetera, et cetera. So I was kind of like that. I even read Richard Dawkins and people like that. Even if I didn't agree with their politics, I thought they seemed to make sense about atheism. It makes me cringe now, to be honest, but it is what it is. And then when 2020 happened, I moved out of the city of Austin and to this small town of Lockhart because I thought it's crazy, these blue cities, once the lockdown stuff was going on, even though in Texas we were only locked down for 6 weeks, and I'm a firefighter by trade, and I was technically for work, I was never locked down. I just kept working. And so all these things were a little confusing in a way. It's like, well, I understand my job's essential, but my ex-wife, my wife at that time, owned 2 salons, and it's like, well, she wants to work, but she can't. I want to work, I can. Stuff just wasn't adding up, and I'd see all of these people pushing this evil, and then I saw people that I unfortunately knew that were basically saying people like me shouldn't be allowed to do this, this, this. If we go outside, we should be taken to jail, etc.
Hmm.
And it kind of hit me like, maybe I was wrong about this spiritual stuff, because this is definitely evil that I'm seeing in certain places. It wasn't just government, and as a libertarian, sometimes you're like, well, government's just inept. They're just dumb. And it started clicking like, I don't think this is just inept or dumb. This is purposeful evil at certain parts. And so I was opening my mind and to the idea that there could be spiritual forces at work. And I was talking to my friend Cyprian from the Royal Path podcast, and my friend at different times, my friend Matt Erickson from the Real King Pill podcast. And I was already we were in this group called Post Libertarian. So we weren't technically considering ourselves libertarian anymore, because it started to see like, okay, this whole time I've been going, if people can just hear our libertarian message, they'll want it. And then during 2020, I looked around, I'm like, they don't want that. A lot of people don't. There's people that fought the lockdowns and whatnot, but I saw so many people across the world. It wasn't just localized. It wasn't just the country. It was everywhere, like pushing authoritarianism. And I started seeing regular folks kind of getting a little bit of a taste of authoritarianism themselves. Like if they could report their neighbors for having a gathering, oh, they love that. And I just thought, okay, I think I was wrong thinking that most people want liberty. So where do we go from here? I was always cultural, well, not always, but for the last several years was culturally right-leaning. And then Cyprian and Matt, at different points, I would interview them on my show, and they would mention orthodoxy. And they both are very deep thinkers and had a keen take on what was going on. And so it started clicking, like they're both Orthodox. Matt was ortho curious at the time. Cyprian was Orthodox. And I just started thinking like something with these guys seems more spot on than just the regular libertarians or post-libertarians, as it were. And I talked to Cyprian offline after an interview once, and I said, I got to ask you about this orthodoxy thing. And he's like, yeah, sure. I mean, I'll talk to you about it, whatever you'd like. What do you want to know? And I said, just a book, first of all. Of course, I come from the libertarian world. It's always, give me a book to read. And he said, Father Seraphim Rose, who I'd never heard of at the time, has a book called God's Revelation to the Human Heart. He said, just get that. Click, 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 ordered it, got it. And it's for the libertarians listening or post-libertarians or whatever that are familiar with Rothbard. It was very thin, almost a pamphlet like Anatomy of the State. And so I got that a few weeks later. At first, I honestly admit, I saw the cover and it had Father Seraphim on the front. And I was like, it's kind of weird looking. This isn't what I was picturing. And so a few weeks later, I start reading it and it blew my mind. And I could feel like a heat in my soul and my heart as I read it. It was kind of overwhelming. And I was like, what in the world? This is nuts. But I also thought, this is not the Christianity I was familiar with at large. It wasn't I grew up, I would say, Protestant, and I was going to, in my high school years, a very Zionistic church. It's in fact, he's probably the most vocal, famous Zionist preacher in America. His name is John Hagee. Mm-hmm. And so I was used to that stuff. And of course, it didn't work for me. I wasn't actively against it. It just didn't stick. It didn't have roots inside me. So I just drifted away and became an atheist. So I'm reading Father Seraphim Rose, and I was like, this is way different. This is more beautiful. It just gripped me and I couldn't stop. Then I read another one of his books that was a touch more political. It was before he was a monk. But I was still turned on by political thought. And there was some of that in this book called Nihilism that he wrote. And I was like, man, he's even kind of on the same page as me. And he wrote this decades ago. And so lo and behold, I'm in a small town of 14,000 people, the barbecue capital, like I mentioned. Mm-hmm. Churches abound here, but they were all Baptist, Catholic, just the regular things you would see.
Sure.
There's an Orthodox church here. I could not believe it because I still looked at it as foreign, exotic, if you will. and
Mm-hmm.
things that didn't match Lockhart, Texas. And I started driving by, and I would look at the sign, and even though it said just come see, and it had a saint outside, I didn't want to go in because I thought, for people listening and not watching, I'm covered in tattoos and I'm a little bit bigger, and I thought, well, they're going to think I'm scary looking, or I don't know what to wear, I don't know what to say, I don't know anything except I've read Father Seraphim Rose. So I didn't go in. And then I get a DM on Twitter by a guy who had followed me and listened to my show. And he said, I heard you say on one of your episodes you live in Lockhart. I would like to invite you to the church that I go to called St. Andrew's Orthodox Church in Lockhart, Texas. And I was like, what? Who is this? And I said, do you live here? Should we meet up for coffee? He's like, no, I'm about an hour and a half away, but I go there every Sunday. And I was like, wow. Well, I've been looking at that church and I'm reading Father Seraphim Rose. And he says, well, there's an icon of Father Seraphim, if that makes you feel better, in that church. And he's my family patron saint. And he said, it's no coincidence that you're living 5 minutes from that church and you're reading Seraphim Rose. And I just got this urge to reach out to you. And so I went, and we can pick up from there. You can interject if you want, but that was the first entry into the church for me.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah. It was a series of what I would have thought at the moment, and I did think this, of coincidences. Like, that's weird. It seems like these things are kind of lining up that I should at least go inside. And so that's how that happened.
So what was your first thought when you went in and attended your first service? Did you attend the Divine Liturgy on Sunday morning, or did you attend Vespers first?
No, it was a Divine Liturgy. And it was different for me because, again, I had only known of a mega church with a preacher that yelled, was a Bible thumper, literally. And I, as a youngster, I kind of thought that was neat, like the passion and yelling and all this stuff and getting people worked up and the altar call. But this was obviously, not that. And I thought, interesting, they're singing everything. And the sermon, as I called it at the time, the homily was like less than 10 minutes. And I had been used to like 45 minutes to an hour of just talking and bad music. When I grew up, I don't like kind of that cheesy church style music, but this had a choir with no instruments. And I thought, well, this is just beautiful. It's weird and different from what I'm used to. And I was married at the time, and we went to brunch afterwards, and she was like, what did you think? It's kind of weird, right? I was like, kind of different, weird, not weird in a bad way, but I mean, I definitely want to go back next Sunday. And also, I'll say this, I spoke with them. Let me see how I can couch this and not get them in trouble. But I spoke with some clergy afterwards, and they mentioned like, hey, I hear you do a podcast. And I'm like thinking like, oh my God, I don't want to talk politics with people. I'm kind of in a niche area of political thought. They're going to think I'm really weird. And I said, yeah. And it's like my priest knew how I was being shy about things. And he says, well, no one's against the communists more than the Orthodox. And I was like, oh, okay. Okay, cool. Now, and I think I can talk with him now. And he explained about how many saints were made through the communists and Bolsheviks and all these things, murdering millions of Orthodox Christians. And so it made me feel more comfortable in that realm. And so, yeah, that's how it started. And I started going back. I grew to love it. And then that was in 2021. And then I became a catechumen in early 2022.
Wow, that's almost the exact same time frame as me.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, let me tell you a little bit. So you're how'd you end up, before I do that, how'd you end up with Father Turbo as your spiritual father?
So I was friends with Cyprian, like we mentioned, and as you know, and probably some people listening know, they do a show together called The Royal Path with another guy named Andrew. Yep. And I started watching that, and I knew that I keep wanting to say Vin is Cyprian's old name. I knew he was Vin's spiritual father. And so I started kind of paying attention a little bit to that. And Vin would write me and say, like, at some point when you're ready, I think you should have Father Turbo on your show. And I said, yeah. And I was honest, and I said, I agree with you, and I'm not ready yet. I could just tell I wasn't. And it didn't take long, though. It said he watches your show, and I mentioned that to him, and he just kind of laughed and said, yeah, he seems like a great guy. And I said, yeah, I might be ready at some point in the next few months, but I'm just not yet. And then lo and behold, we hooked up. He said, here's Father Turbo's number. He said you can reach out to him. I did. I invited him on the show. Prior to recording, we had a good talk, probably 10 or 15 minutes before I recorded, which caught me off guard. I didn't expect that. I was used to having people, you talk for a couple minutes before Zoom, and he was real genuine. Just, so how are you doing? What's going on with you? And I think at that point, my now ex-wife had decided to leave, but I can't remember. But she ended up leaving me over sordid reasons, but focusing mainly on, nope, I'm not doing this church thing. And it freaked her out. And I remember Father Turbo said, once you start talking about this stuff on your show, which you already have, like you're going to get attacked by demons, just so you know that. He said, you can't have a platform like yours and putting these things out into the world without attacks on you. And I was like, okay, that's good, I guess. And I remember he said, you're going to start to feel the cold spray paint of a target being spray painted on your back, and they'll be coming for you. But you have Christ. And it was just real interesting and loving, and then we developed a relationship, and we would text and call one another. Then he'd come on the show again. And we just he's also has a very similar, let's say, subculture that I grew up in, background as I do. He was a tattoo artist, and we have a lot of similarities that we could also talk about other than the church. And then we became close. And one day I was wanting to ask him, and then I already had a priest, though. So the typical thing is your priest is your spiritual father.
Right.
And one day my priest said, I was thinking about how to ask. I didn't know how to do this. And my priest just wrote me, and he goes, by the way, if you want to ask Father Turbo to be your spiritual father, you have my blessing. I know you all have a lot in common and you're close. And I was like, weird. Okay. I was going to ask him, but I didn't even have to ask him.
Yeah. And that's interesting, since your priest is closer to you. So that was
5 minutes from my house.
Yeah. Wow.
And so I actually had asked Father Turbo already. And he said, make sure you get your priest's blessing. But if you do get it, I'd love to. And so that's kind of how it went down.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah, we overlap both in timeline and a lot of those details. So Perpin and I started the podcast back in November of 2021, October 2021, one of those two. And so basically we were having conversations on the way to workshops, and then they were different than everybody else's conversations in the prepper homesteading sphere, and about community and things. So we started just recording our conversations. And then long about that time, we were also in the Bitcoin Mystery School, and we might have been in Counter Markets. And so Cyprian, who used to be Vin Armani, was becoming Orthodox. And the shenanigans were happening in 2020, but they really started getting in 2021. So, we had the usual shenanigans in 2020, and I live in Northeast Kansas. It's right outside of Lawrence, which is the college town, KU. And it's very much like Austin. It's not quite as crazy as they say Austin is. But I mean, at one point there during 2020, they had people sending hundreds of Karen calls to the Department of Health to report people.
Oh, wow.
And even though we had an exception in the ordinance, for the various goofy things, then it didn't matter, because all the businesses were they could get fined $2,500 or something like that. And there was no way for them to defend themselves. Just,
Right.
health department show up and say, Karen said you didn't kick this person out, $2,500 on you, or or whatever else. And so that was going on. And I was like this doesn't seem like a science thing.
Right. Right.
This doesn't seem like a science thing. And when the Kansas governor by May of 2020 was already saying, yeah, we're not going back to normal until there's a medical intervention and everybody has gotten it right.
Wow.
And she said, that's 2 years. So you got to be ready. Nothing's going back to normal.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we're like, what? And then her and her medical for, did I say something wrong?
No.
And, yeah. And then her and her medical director got on people's case because they were, they said you shouldn't have to drive more than 2 miles to get food. Otherwise you're locked down and you need to be locked down. And I'm like, we're in Kansas. It's 350 miles to the border. And in Western Kansas, you have to drive to the next county to get food. So, what are you talking about? And things just started not adding up. So we're going along, and Cyprian's starting to become Orthodox. He's starting to drop the bombs of some of the things that he's learning. And Perpin was closer to him than I was. So, and Perpin, even though he grew up evangelical, was reading the Desert Fathers when he was a kid.
Wow. Okay.
And, much to the consternation of his family. And so at some point along about October 2021, he said, hey, Father Turbo is Cyprian's spiritual father, and he's in Kansas City. And I'm like, how is Cyprian's spiritual father in Kansas City? And he said, yeah, that's where the church is. And I'm like, well, and I still had the evangelical model of church. Either you have to go physically or whatever. At this point, everybody was doing it, virtually. So Perpin said they're having a garden tour, and I want to go over there, and I want to see their garden, because they had bought up a bunch of city blocks there in the hood in downtown Kansas City, right? And so we wanted to go over there for the garden tour. I'm wearing a 1984 make make Orwell Fiction Again shirt, right? And I'm wearing a like camo hat or something like that, right? And so we go over there and we're touring the garden, and Father Turbo's standing over to the side and he's looking at us like this out of the corner of his eye, sort of like that meme that we always talk about, where it's welcome you joined Orthodoxy because of all the problems in the world. Glory to God. You'll soon find out the problem is you. That picture is the look. Right. And so we took the tour. We met we met Phil Lorette, who runs the garden there. And then we went into the church, into the basement, and we're talking to Father Turbo, and he gave us a couple of bookmark sized icons. So I was an evangelical for 30 years and had no intention of becoming Orthodox. And but all this stuff's going on, and I said, basically, my faith is not going to be able to handle this from a suffering standpoint. And I'd already had all of my friends, I mean, literally all of my friends, except one, that had already given in because they were going to lose their job. And then they became, poster children for the intervention, right? And stuff. And then Cyprian gave me Saint Tikhon's biography, and I'm reading it, and it talks about the Russian Revolution, and Saint Tikhon was the first one of the first Orthodox guys in America. He was the missionary to America, right? And then he went back to Russia and became the patriarch. So he's the patriarch. He's the head dude when the Bolsheviks caused the Russian Revolution.
Mm.
And one of the things they did was they came out with the religious freedom law. And it basically said, yeah, you can have your church, but we are confiscating all your church property. And now it's the government property.
Mm.
And all that, and watching all that happen and unfold in the book and the story, I'm like, wait a minute, this is happening here. I mean, so it's like, oh, you can't go to church.
Mm-hmm.
And I was having conversations with my friends, and they're like, hey, we don't have a problem. We'll just sit at home. And I'm like, you're going to sit at home and just watch it on TV on your computer for the next 2 years?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Wow.
I'm like, I got to the point where I said, are you not going to stand up at all?
Right.
And it was, no, we trust the authorities and, and everything else. Right. So it's like, and it was very, very strange. So then Perpin became catechumen, and I started going with him because he doesn't drive. So, and I started going with him to catechism class or some class, right? And I started going, wait a minute, this is different and interesting.
Yeah. Yes. Was it at St. Mary of Egypt with Father
Yeah.
Turbo? Oh, cool. Okay.
And then I started going there, and then Father Turbo said, and this is a long ways from us. This is like an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half from our place.
Mm-hmm.
So then Father Turbo said, yeah, there's one over in Topeka, and that's closer to you. So I recommend that you go over there. And then, so Perpin was looking and saying that he was seeking intentional community. And he was like wanting a bunch of us homesteader guys to like move close together and have intentional community. Well, none of us are interested in doing that. And then not to that level that he's talking about. So he left and went over to Kansas City, and so he could be closer to the church, go to services all the time, and then have that intentional community. And then he ended up going towards the monastic path, and now he's found his intentional community at the monastery. And he's writing some pretty impressive letters from the monastery.
Neat. Okay. Do
So
you
yeah,
have to get Father Turbo's blessing to go there? How did that work?
Yeah, of course. So he started going immediately after he became a catechumen, and they went to the monastery. He's been to the monastery like 5 times. And then and Father Turbo's his spiritual father. So he's been going, and then and knew he was on the monastic path for most of the last 2 years. So yeah, so it was pretty interesting, and then it just kept going for me, and then I got and then I became Orthodox at Pascha. The thing that blew my mind was Pascha, which is Orthodox Easter for those who don't know. Yeah. And it takes place at midnight. Mm-hmm. And you do a procession around the church, and then you come up to the door, and the priest bangs on the door. It's supposed to be the gates of hell. Mm-hmm. And he's banging on the door, and he says, what's he say? He says, open for the King of Glory. And the guy inside says, who is this King of Glory?
Yeah.
Right. And then they opened the door, and it was just like the most exciting thing. I've never seen anybody being that exciting from Jesus rising from the dead. Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, in most of the churches that I've been to, they actually watered down Easter because it's the day when the most people come to church. Mm-hmm. And so they would mamby-pamby the message. I'm like, why? Mm-hmm. So, and then Pascha season lasts for a month or two. So mm-hmm. A month later, they're still excited. And I've never seen anything like this before. And
Hmm.
just that night changed me.
Nice. Okay.
I mean, it was just amazing. And I struggled with the whole idea. So at this whole time, this stuff's going on with the medical intervention. I went to a job that was remote.
Hmm.
And I'm like, hey, I'm cool now. Nobody's going to touch me. And then they like, nope, we're going to require you to get that as well. I'm like, what? That doesn't even make any sense. I'm not even in the same state as you.
Hmm.
And and then that convinced me that it wasn't a
Right.
scientific thing.
It wasn't made to make sense.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, and that's pretty much so yeah, I go over to Topeka, which is a little closer.
Okay. Okay.
And then once in a while I go over to St. Mary's in
What
Kansas City.
jurisdiction is the one in Topeka?
It's Antiochian.
Okay. Cool.
So yeah. Which one
Nice.
what's the one in Lockhart? That's
Rocor.
Antioch. Oh, it's
Rocor.
Rocco. Okay. Yeah, it's kind of funny with the the folks online or like you know, everybody thinks it's the ortho bros, and the people that represent orthodoxy online are usually pretty like jerks or whatever. Like
Yeah, they can be.
so, it's I liked what you said today that really stood out to me. It's like one of the tougher things to grapple with is comprehending how much you don't know,
Hmm.
and it's the easiest thing to be prideful about.
Hmm. It's tough. Yeah, the paradox, many of them.
Yeah. So, but so sorry, I did a whole lot of talking right there.
That's okay. I love it. Yeah, I like it back and forth.
Yeah. So what's your big plans? Or let's see what. So one of the things that stands out to me is like that law that freedom of religion law that was
Mm.
in Russia. They did the
Mhm.
same thing during COVID in Montenegro in
Really?
Europe. Yeah. So
Okay.
in December of 2019, they passed a law on freedom of religion. And they said any churches before 1918 or monasteries are now government property.
Whoa.
And you couldn't protest because it's coof time.
Hmm.
And so the priests and the folks went out and did processions and protested anyway. And they've got enough of a outcry to get enough of the people kicked out in the next election to rescind it.
Good. Wow. Okay.
And people are saying, yeah, yeah. I have so many people say to me, why are you so worked up about COVID? We won, it's done. They're not doing any of
Mm.
that stuff now.
Right.
And, we saw that in 2019, the exact same wording was used in Ukraine for
Hmm.
them seizing the Orthodox Church there.
Right.
And one of the things that people don't understand is that all of those laws, those those CUF laws for they're still in the books.
Yeah.
So they rewrote the emergency management laws in most of the states, and it codified all of those procedures, and those are still there even in Florida.
I know.
DeSantis signed that back in
Right.
2021, and it's not been rescinded. So the Bolsheviks are going to do what the Bolsheviks are going to do.
Yes. It's that ratchet effect, I think they call it. And once they tighten it down, you can loosen it a little bit, but it's not as loose as it was prior to the initial tightening of
Mm-hmm.
of the rules, laws, whatever you want to call it, pressure on our culture, on society. You can lessen it just a little bit, but it's still worse than where we before we started.
Right.
And that's just kind of the way this stuff heads. That's the direction the train goes, it seems like.
Yeah. One of the things that's really worrisome is that now it's down at the county level. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the counties have passed laws like the Jackson County, Missouri, which is Kansas City, was in the process of of passing a ordinance where it would give the health director of the county the right to shut down individual churches.
Mhm.
So no more are you saying, all churches, you can't go to church. It's that church. There's no recourse. And you know which church they were purposely looking at.
Wow.
So, and it just, the counties don't keep very good records of what they agree to and what their conversations are in the county commission meetings. So I don't know if that ever got passed, but they were debating it at one point.
Mm. Hopefully they're not wise enough to figure it out, but you never know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, it's people get on my case about, oh, that's all in the past. What are you complaining about? And yeah, it's still a thing.
It is, and I just try to think of it as like when milestone events like that happen. I mean, I still remember I was partying with a bunch of musician friends in Memphis, Tennessee, people I knew from all over the country in February of 2020. I have still pictures of it, fond memories, great time, just having a blast. We would have never thought in 1 month the world's going to change. And it's
Mhm.
funny how it's like it did change, and everyone has the short-term memory, like, well, all right, we're good. It's like in 2 weeks from now, something could arise, and it's like something you'd never ever imagine. And they've already pushed it this far. And we saw so many people just not only go with it, I think like push for it. People that
Mhm.
have no power wanted a lot of these things. Now, certainly some people have learned a lesson from it, I think. And depending on where you're at, I think there could be some bigger pushback than there was previously. But to think like, oh, it's over, it's past us, it's like, you don't think there's something coming down at some point that could be either that extreme or worse,
Mhm.
is to me a little bit naive, in my opinion.
So what do you think? There's a lot of folks that, maybe even at this point are saying, oh, you guys are just Orthodox because you're right wing and all that other
Hmm.
stuff. I'm like, I'm less likely to be Orthodox if that's the case.
Yeah, I tried not to lead anymore. It's actually not even trying, but I do make it a point if I'm discussing it on a bigger platform, an open platform where people are listening and watching. I don't lead with politics in my mind, and it's nothing I even consciously, excuse me, thought I can't do this. It's just once you start to get into orthodoxy, you understand, hopefully, that it's a worldview and not
Mhm.
just like a thing I do on Sunday.
Right.
And so that's first and foremost, not Republican, Democrat, left, right, libertarian, whatever. Like those things are all so surface when orthodoxy takes you much deeper. So I don't even look at things in terms of like who's right or left. I mean, it's still habit to do so when I'm watching TV or if I'm catching a political show, obviously. But
Mhm.
for my own self, I don't think of day to day life or issues so much. Which party's doing what or whatnot. It's just I'm an Orthodox Christian. If someone wants to label me right or whatever, libertarian, post libertarian, that's fine. I don't usually lead with that though at this point.
Yeah, and then you can always tell, like, one of the guys who is people show up at coffee hour after church, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and if they want to talk about stuff like that, people just look at them like, really, you don't want to, you want to talk about that?
Mm-hmm.
We'd rather talk about this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We'd rather talk about some Orthodox thing.
Right.
And we were Purpet and I were driving back from church one day, and we said, yeah, this guy is like, he's like kind of going off on the ortho bro stuff. And Purpet said, yeah, that's because he's not spending enough time with Orthodox people.
Yes, that's common too. And also I do think there's people that say they're Orthodox online, and sometimes I get the feeling they don't spend enough time with Orthodox people either,
Oh yeah.
because there is a spirit of anger and bitterness and who's going to debate me on this thing
Mhm.
that seems to be more so online than in real life. And I often see things and I'm like, man, I wonder if their priests know that they write stuff like this.
Sure.
Um, I'm not trying to pass judgment on them, but I do get a feeling sometimes that some people are more orthodox online personas than they might be in real life.
Mhm. Oh yeah, most of the people that are like that, especially on Twitter, I don't,
Yeah.
if you actually ask them questions, they're not even catechumens. They're just
Yeah.
inquiring folks. And I said all kinds of stupid things when I was a catechumen. So
Oh my God. Me too.
I deleted a whole lot of them.
That's probably a good
So
idea. I don't know if I I don't know if I have. I have some, but yeah, I've been caught. It's pride. Pride gets you. And I've been caught in arguments where I'm like, stop, what are you doing? Let it go. And now I try to approach when people give me pushback or leave negative comments on videos. Don't Doesn't really bother me. Every once in a while it's kind of funny to me. It'll make me laugh and I'll screenshot it and share it with friends. But I just don't feel like the pushback for me, unless they're attacking like someone I love personally, maybe. But even then, it's like, okay. And I heard from an Orthodox guy once, and it stuck with me. You can't argue anyone into heaven, but you can argue them out. And so I've kind of tried to live with that stuck in my mind as well.
yeah, definitely. And that's the whole thing. It's like I I never would have been able to be argued in, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
sort of like, so you've taken um Father Turbo's catechism, right?
Not his personally, no. I went
Oh,
through the
okay.
catechumen period here.
Uh-huh.
And during that is when I met him. So
Okay.
it wasn't his. I'd like to. I mean, I'm always open to learn something, and I know he knows a lot. So
Well, yeah, so everybody just keeps taking it. So if you get on the Zoom, he does it on Wednesday nights, and everybody just
he
they keep
does.
coming back. Yeah.
Well, Father Turbo, I need to write him and ask him. I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah, he does. Yeah. And then, well, it goes in cycles, right? It might not be doing it right now, but it'll go for a couple months, and then it'll take a couple month break, and then it'll start back again
Okay.
and stuff. But one of the things he said, and I've been through two cycles of it, because catechism lasts over a year, right?
Hmm.
And I've been through two cycles of it, and he starts it out with that look that he gives, and he goes, reality check here. Many of you will not make it to baptism, and a lot more of you will not be Orthodox 2 years after baptism because of the trials.
Yep.
And but don't lose heart. Let's get started.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
and
Yes.
I
That's
always chuckle.
I don't want to claim the original version of that, but I think that meme we're talking about was made because of something he said on my show. I could be wrong. Maybe it's someone another show as well, but he did say initially that meme on my show, and he started it with saying something like, I think he said like the dirty secret out there that no one talks about is the attrition rate is pretty
Mhm.
high, especially in the catechumen uh, part part of your journey. And he's like, people it's just basically that, I'm anti this, I'm anti woke, I'm anti gay, I'm anti left, blah, blah, blah. That even sounded like him. And then you get into it and it's like, that's not all the problem. The problem is you. And then they're like, oh, man, I got other stuff to do on Sundays now. And then they kind of just back out. Like, the last thing I want to do is look in the mirror about what's wrong. Everyone likes looking in the mirror and thinking that they're good. But yeah, that's part of the burning off of this crap, basically, that was on the surface level and sometimes deeper multi-level surfaces inside you, but it's trying to burn. Christ wants that to burn away. It's not fun all of the time.
Right. Yeah, yeah, and after one of those cycles, I said, "So what do I do now? I want some formula, right?" And he said, "Just live the life of the church." And I go, "Well, what's that mean?" He goes, come to church, participate, come to the whatever the special days and everything else, and that is how it works. It's not a consumption thing. It's not a you show up and you consume the service, or you're entertained, or I mean, the liturgy is pretty much similar every week, right? It's not just showing up and saying, oh, well, I got this figured out, because I know some people that think like that, right? Oh, I got this figured out. It's the same every week. I can just, I don't need to go every week, right? And but it's that whole thing. So, and he said, look, you're going to look at things completely different 4 months from now than you do now. And I go back and I read some book that, like Father Callistos, where I read that really early on. I don't even remember reading that. I looked at it and I go, I did not read this. I can't remember reading this. This is too much different. That the mindset was totally different.
Yeah.
And I was just like, wow.
Yeah, it's almost like learning a new language, and you start off reading parts of it, but it's not all clicking, and then you learn more of the language, and then you go back, oh, now this part makes sense. I missed that the first time. And then it's like, as your, I guess, if they say the Orthodox phronema, if you can somewhat acquire a little bit more here and there, some of the things you read, it's like a whole new beautiful language that you're starting to see, that initially you're like, okay, well, cool, got it, and you put it away.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so bonus question: what's your favorite Christmas holiday tradition or favorite memory?
Ooh, geez, that's a good one. That's funny. As soon as you said memory, I thought of a bad one. But
I know. If you asked me that, the first thing that would come to my mind is the bad one.
Yeah, I'm a firefighter. I'll just tell it's kind of funny. It's not like bad, but I'm a firefighter, and when you're young, you don't get Christmas off if that's the day it falls, because all the old guys pick vacation. Like, well, I get Christmas, so for a long time I didn't get it if I worked.
Sure.
And I remember going to this manure farm that was on fire, and it was so cold, even in Texas it was Christmas night. And I was on top of a pile of that, spraying it with water. And it was like midnight. And I looked at my watch and it was freezing. And I was like, what a funny thing that's happening for me at Christmas, on top of manure, spraying out fire, freezing my butt off. Anyway, that's a funny but bad memory. I would say just being with my family. My brother works in Hollywood, so I see him once a year at Christmas with my parents and my aunt. Those are just always fun times. My mom absolutely loves me and my brother and seeing us together, and it's just real sweet and fun. And we do it every year, somewhere around 23rd, 24th. It's not always set on one. Honestly, sometimes it depends on my work schedule. But yeah, it's just being with those people. It's always nice and just kind of relaxing and not a lot of stress. Some people get stressed over the holidays, but my family's always made it quite pleasant and just loving and sweet. It's a great time. And this year I'm doing that, so I'm excited. And then on Christmas Day, I'm flying up to see my girlfriend and her family in Pennsylvania. So I'll actually be around real snow, I think, and get to do stuff with their family. So I've never done that yet. I'm excited about that.
That's great. Well, thanks, Buck. Thanks for coming on Thrive in the Future this week.
Yeah, man, this has been cool, Scott. Thank you. It's funny, we have such a similar timeline.
Yeah, it is really funny. Take care.
Yep. Thank you, sir.